So we all know that when we're living in the world and we're looking at things, we're only seeing a part of it. That if we step back, we see something different. That where we are at any particular moment, we're framing the issue, and if we change the frame, something looks different inside of it. So I've been thinking about framing for a long time and writing about it and looking about this unique capability that human beings have and why it's been overlooked and why it shouldn't be anymore. And let me talk about it by explaining it through a story. So about 20 years ago, a friend of mine who's a fancy business consultant in the Middle East came to me back in London. He was very chuffed, very excited that he had created a new plan for students in Saudi Arabia to benefit from a scholarship program by the Ministry of Education to apply online through an online application. He was excited. I wasn't. I thought I saw some problems with it. Felt might increase inequalities. You needed to have a computer. This is 20 years ago. You needed to have internet access. He said, no, Ken, you're looking at it the wrong way. Like, change the way that you're viewing this. In Saudi Arabia, there's internet cafes everywhere. People can get online. That's not the problem. The issue is that all the principals nominate the students. And they always nominate boys. By creating an online application through the internet that people can apply themselves, now girls can apply. And the Ministry of Education, which is far more liberal than the local school principals, can choose the best candidate for the scholarship, not just the person with a given gender. Now, I thought that was really interesting. I loved that because it really forced me to confront the idea that I was seeing the world in one way when there was another way to look at it. While in the West, these class divisions and inequalities are omnipresent, they're still there in Saudi Arabia too, but there in the local context, the gender inequalities are equally as important, if not more vital, to think about. And I had missed that. It shows the importance of framing, about how we see the world. Now, at every moment in time, we are simply making a simulation of what's likely to happen. As we've heard from a speaker before, what we do with our minds is largely make predictions about what the world is and how it's going to unfold. And we're doing this constantly. The issue is that we're taking it for granted, but if we stop and think deliberately about how we think about the world, how we frame situations and frame issues, we can actually adjust the frame and make better decisions that way. These frames are mental models. They're representations of the world. They allow us to abstract, and they allow us to generalize, and they allow us to predict. Now, we've done this before, and you can see it in one classic example of framing and reframing. The geocentric notion of the planets and the heavens and the earth, with the earth at the center. We could identify with these very copious maps exactly where Venus would be in 20 years, the exact location in the sky, but it was really, really difficult. Accurate, but difficult. If you change the frame, it simplifies things. It also corresponds better to reality, and therefore these maps were not actually more accurate, but they did represent the reality better, and as a result, they were more extensible. We could do more with it, and we have. Now, there's also cases of misframing, where we think we see the world in one way, but the world is a little bit different and a little bit more complicated than we imagined. In the Middle Ages, the anatomy textbooks tried to create a symbiosis, a parallel between the organs within and the celestial bodies without. Now, that would never cure someone, obviously, if it was used in medical practice. But we have done it still in our own day. It was only a century ago that Timur Lysenko in the Soviet Union had a theory of botany that was founded on Marxist-Leninist ideology. Stalin and the Politburo loved him. The problem, of course, is that if your theory of botany is based on a political ideology, it might not be best for plant growth. And indeed, it contributed to famines that were so devastating, it killed tens of millions of people. Okay. The people, by the way, who spoke out against it, the scientists who had a different frame, a more scientific frame, well, they were shot and their families were imprisoned. In our own day, just in the past 30 years, Francis Fukuyama framed the world as on a march directed towards liberal market democracies. And even back then, he was criticized as seeing the world in a very suburban American utopian way. But we can see, sadly, in our own day, with the rise of nationalist populism on one side, with the events in Ukraine on another, that in fact there was more going on in the world than was captured in the way that he was conceptualizing it. Now, we're often told in behavioral science and in cognitive sciences and in behavioral economics that humans are really bad at making decisions, that we suffer from biases and cognitive biases. We've heard that already today on the TED stage. That there's noise involved, there's variability, so our judgment can't be fully trusted. At the same time, we're told that we need to trust data, get more data, and if we get more data, we will make better decisions. Now, as someone who's written books about data, I'm all in on big data. That's not the problem. However, there is more to the story. And that is that the data is relatively meaningless unless it is in a model. A statistician would say a statistical model, but before there's even a statistical model, there has to be a mental model. We have to frame it in the right way. By doing so, and doing so better, we're no longer in this Kahnemandian trap in which we have to be better decision makers between option A or B. If we reframe the issue, step back, we will increase the range of alternatives. Now it's about choosing between option A, B, C, D, or E. By increasing the range of options, we improve our choices, and we get better outcomes. So let's think about it right now in terms of this. Triangles. How many triangles do you see on the screen right now? This is not controversial data. This is not Brexit. This is not Donald Trump. This is just pixels on a screen. So shout it out. What do you see? How many? Count out the number of triangles and tell me what you see. 11. 0. 5. 7. Okay. 2. Any others? 8. Okay. So I did hear a 0. How many people saw 0? I mean, it's so interesting. And how many people saw 11? Okay, that looks like 6.1% of you. All right, so it turns out that when my co-author, Francis de Vericourt, did this with his executive education CEOs, they came to a wide spectrum of answers as well. Right? Some people saw 11, 14% saw 0. It makes sense, right? If your definition of a triangle is 3 unbroken lines, it's a very mathematical and purist definition, then there indeed are 0 triangles here. What's interesting, though, is that you all came to a different answer with the same data. It underscores that the data itself is meaningless, not entirely, but largely meaningless, relative to the way that you represented the problem. And if you change the way you represent the problem, you can change the answer that you get. Now, for those of you who answered 5 or 11, you must have seen this, right? What's interesting there is that a very fascinating element of human cognition was taking place. What you were counting wasn't information, but the absence of information. You were using counterfactual reasoning, right? It wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't there. So when we think in frames, they are enabled with 3 features. The first one is causality, counterfactuals, and constraints. Causality is a theory, a given sense of how the world works with cause and effect. Now, often our sense of causality is wrong, but it doesn't matter. Having causality makes the world predictable. It makes things repeatable. Counterfactuals are not about anti-facts. They're about the multiplicity of ways the world can evolve. These are imagined alternative realities that we can actually grasp and interact with and play with and simulate in our minds. Right? It's playing the game of life several ticks ahead, and we're doing it all the time, asking what-if questions. Then there's constraints. These counterfactuals can't be unbounded. They can't be like a balloon wafted up into the sky. That would be meaningless. Instead, they need to be limited. They need to be constrained. They need to be appropriate for the specific situation that they find itself in. So let's think about what that means a little bit more, the ability to see what isn't there when we think about what's about to happen here. Oh, you can already feel the pain. Now, interestingly, you have probably no direct experience of this whatsoever. So as I've shown this to you, a symphony of cognitive capabilities and framing is happening in your mind as you simulate the possibilities embedded with these frames of causality, counterfactuals, if it were not to take place, and constraints. You care about certain things and not others. You're focusing on certain dimensions of this at the ignorance of other dimensions. And indeed, the classic moment comes and our poor fellow is crushed. Okay. But what was interesting is that you had the causal conception of what was going to happen, your counterfactuals you could play with, but you actually were constrained. You didn't care whether it was a male or a female. Didn't matter. You put it aside. That he was wearing, I think it's a he, beige and not brown. That there was a hat involved, right? The hat didn't matter. And if you cared about something else, a different question like the dry cleaning, you would have focused on something different. But here you had a causal connection and you applied one particular frame to it without having any direct experience of it yourself. It's for that reason that we can launch, lunar probes to the moon without any experience and experiment on how to restart engines in empty space without oxygen, because we can frame it based on the known laws of physics, the known laws of combustion. This dimension of human cognition is something that machines cannot do. Artificial intelligence should be celebrated in many ways. It is an astounding advancement, and it's going to lead to great promise in society if we can use it and control it well. However, AI cannot frame. It doesn't have any sense of causality. It doesn't have any ability to conjure up counterfactuals. It could probably give you several trillion all at once, but it can't give you the right counterfactuals. And it wouldn't know how to apply the meaningful constraints in any rational way. And this AI systems that have shown such extraordinary promise that should indeed be celebrated themselves have frames in them. They are those representations of the world. These mental models are imposed by the creators, but they can't adjust them and they can't reframe when they need to. Let me give you an example of how this has been used before. In the 1990s, activists in the gay community were sort of beside themselves. They didn't understand how it was possible that after decades of trying to make the case for same-sex marriage, they really were getting nowhere, and the majority of America was opposed to it. They were emphasizing the idea of legal rights, but they felt that it was just too sterile, and through focus groups and poring over data, they realized there was just no traction to this concept of legal rights in same-sex marriage. So they tested lots of possibilities, conjuring up a different way of doing it, and they realized that what they could do is change the communication away from legal rights towards marriage as an expression of love and commitment. It was meeting straight people, the majority of the public, where they already were, with the mental templates that they already had. Once they changed that messaging, it turned out to be very effective, and soon, very quickly over time, the concept of same-sex marriage gained incredible traction, and now the majority of the American public supports it. So how can we become better framers? There's two general ways. The first one is we can adjust our frame. We're in a particular frame, but we need to play with it a little bit. We can find out what are the constraints that are mutable, changing those that are soft constraints and keeping constant those that are hard constraints. We can also try to reframe if we need to, adopting an entirely different frame by building one and finding one in our repertoire of frames that we may have, repurposing one from one domain to another, or reinventing one. It helps to be very good at cognitive foraging, going out into the world and adopting new ways of thinking and stepping into other people's shoes. By doing so, you increase the mental models that you have at your disposal, and you can apply the right one at the right time. Now, two archetypes are really powerful to think about how you can become good at framing and how institutions can actually encourage it. The first one is the court jester. With his tri-corned hat and marat in hand, we think that he's more of the comic or the bard at court, but it was far from the truth. The reality is that court jesters in medieval Europe were essential. After all, they were the only one at court who could speak truth to the king, provided it was done in a face-saving way with a limerick and a jest. These court jesters were legendary in helping the sovereign see things from a different perspective and avoiding crises where need be, and helping them make better decisions by giving them different ways of thinking about a problem. So important is the court jester as an archetype that when NASA commissioned research for long-haul space travel, they looked at all the capabilities that would be needed for the crew. There needed to be a captain, there needed to be a social secretary. They also felt the need to have someone who's a little bit like a jester, who can disarm a tense situation with a joke. Likewise, the second archetype that's useful is the Cassandra. Now, in ancient Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy, but could not communicate it. Andrew Grove, in his memoirs, pointed out, the founder of Intel, that in fact these corporate Cassandras, the Cassandra in the corporate setting, are absolutely essential because so many companies are in a world in which all the executives think one way, but there's usually one person who says, wait a minute, if we do this, if we continue on this path, we're gonna have a problem. Likewise, Ed Catmull, the founder and CEO and former CEO of Pixar, said he deliberately looks out for corporate Cassandras, the executives who bring new ways of thinking to management so that they're not in some sort of insular mental environment. What this calls for is pluralism. We've long talked about the value of diversity, and the social science is really quite clear that when you have diverse teams, they always perform better than homogeneous units. It's not easy to do, but it's great to do because you actually get this performance boost, even if there's a tension. Beyond diversity and tolerance, it's the idea of pluralism. It's not that these are two separate concepts that are sort of separate from each other, but they actually interact with each other. Having groups that enable and give the ability to people to speak their mind and to see the world differently and bring that together is ever more essential. This clash of mental models and of framing is tense. It's not easy at all, but doing so leads to great promise and better decisions. We are at a time in the world, obviously, where we have these challenges that we've been trying to face down and doing a poor job of for decades. It's time not just to look for better answers from what's on the table, but to reframe the problem and come up with better answers that way. Doing so requires that we have a tolerance to other people, that we work together. We've got to find a way to become better framers. Thanks a lot.